The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the rugged landscape of the frontier. Elara Whitfield stood on the porch of her modest homestead, her gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of her ranch. The rolling hills and distant mountains framed her small piece of land, a sanctuary carved from the harsh wilderness. It was a solitary existence, shaped by the relentless demands of ranching and the ever-present threat of the untamed world beyond her fences. As the day began to fade, Elara felt a familiar sense of unease settle over her. The winds whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with them a chill that hinted at the approaching night. She had grown accustomed to the solitude, but there were moments when the isolation weighed heavily on her. Living on the edge of civilization had its perils, and the frontier was a place where kindness could be both a blessing and a curse. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elara noticed a figure stumbling toward her from the direction of the mountains. The silhouette was gaunt and weary, a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the sunset. Her heart quickened, and she instinctively reached for the rifle that leaned against the porch railing. It was an instinct born from years of living in a land where danger lurked in unexpected places. As the figure drew closer, Elara's grip on the rifle relaxed. It was a man, his clothes tattered and his face drawn with exhaustion. She could see the desperation in his eyes, a reflection of the harsh reality that plagued many in these parts. The man stumbled, nearly falling before regaining his footing. Elara could see that he was a mountain hunter, likely lost and starving, a victim of the unforgiving wilderness. "Help!" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, I need help." Elara hesitated for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had heard tales of mountain hunters, men who roamed the peaks in search of game, often driven by desperation or greed. Yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw not a threat, but a man on the brink of collapse. The instinct to help surged within her, overpowering her caution. "Come inside," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I have some food. You can rest." The man nodded weakly, gratitude flooding his features as he stumbled toward her. Elara led him into the modest cabin, which was warmed by the fading embers of the hearth. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the aromas of the simple stew simmering on the stove. She motioned for him to sit at the small table, and as he lowered himself onto the chair, she could see the tremors in his hands. "My name is Weston Hale," he introduced himself, his voice hoarse. "I've been lost in the mountains for days. I thought I wouldn't make it back." Elara filled a bowl with the steaming stew and handed it to him. "Eat. You need to regain your strength." Weston accepted the bowl with trembling hands, his eyes lighting up as he took the first few bites. Elara watched him, a mix of concern and compassion swelling in her chest. She had always believed in the power of kindness, even in a world that often rewarded cruelty. But as she observed the way he devoured the food, she couldn't shake the feeling that her decision to help him might have unforeseen consequences. "Thank you," he murmured between mouthfuls. "I didn't think anyone would be out here to help me." Elara felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "Most folks are too busy trying to survive to worry about others. But we're all human, aren't we? We have to look out for each other." Weston nodded, his expression somber. "You're right. It's easy to forget that out here." As they shared the meal in silence, Elara felt a strange connection forming between them. Here was a man who had faced the wilderness alone, and in that shared struggle, she found a sense of kinship. They were both products of the frontier, shaped by the land and its unforgiving nature. After he finished eating, Weston leaned back in his chair, a look of relief washing over his face. "I can't thank you enough for this. I thought I was done for." Elara smiled softly, feeling a sense of purpose in her actions. "Just don't go wandering off into the mountains again without proper supplies. It's dangerous out there." "Believe me, I've learned my lesson," he replied, a hint of a smile breaking through his weariness. "I owe you my life." As night fell, the cabin was illuminated by the flickering light of the fire. Ilara offered Weston a blanket and a place to sleep on the floor, grateful that she could provide him with shelter. She settled into her own bed, her mind racing with thoughts of what the next day might bring. The world outside was dark and full of unknowns, but within the walls of her cabin, she felt a fleeting sense of safety. However, as she drifted off to sleep, a nagging worry tugged at her thoughts. What if Weston's presence attracted trouble? The frontier was a lawless place, and the last thing she needed was to draw attention to her homestead. Yet, the kindness she had shown him felt like the right thing to do, and she couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes the smallest gestures could lead to the most significant changes. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the wind howling outside and the occasional crackle of the fire. Ilara awoke before dawn, the sky still cloaked in darkness. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb Weston, who lay asleep on the floor. As she moved to the kitchen, she noticed the first hints of light breaking over the horizon, casting a pale glow across the land. The tranquility of the morning was short-lived. As Ilara prepared breakfast, she glanced out the window, her heart sinking at the sight before her. The horizon was filled with the silhouettes of riders, their figures stark against the awakening sky. Panic surged through her as she counted them. There were at least 200, all armed and positioned across her fields. "What in the world?" she whispered to herself, her heart racing. The peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare in an instant. She turned back to Weston, who was stirring awake. "You need to see this," she urged, her voice urgent. He quickly rose, still groggy but alert, as he stepped to the window. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of the encampment. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "I don't know," Ilara replied, her mind racing. "They could be raiders, or worse." Weston's expression hardened. "We need to do something. If they're here for trouble, we can't just wait for them to come to us." Ilara felt a surge of fear and uncertainty. "What can we do? We're outnumbered." "We need to figure out what they want," Weston suggested, his voice steady despite the panic that gripped Ilara. "Maybe they're not here to fight. Maybe they're just passing through." Ilara nodded, though her heart sank at the thought. The frontier had taught her that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. As they watched the riders begin to set up camp, a mix of dread and determination filled the air. She knew that her small act of kindness had set off a chain of events that could alter the course of her life. The presence of the riders loomed over her homestead like a dark cloud, and Ilara felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had helped a starving mountain hunter, but now the consequences of that choice were unfolding before her eyes. The air was thick with tension, and she could sense that the day ahead would be anything but ordinary. The morning light cast a harsh glare across the valley, illuminating the encampment of riders that had risen overnight like a dark omen. Ilara Whitfield stood at the window, her heart racing as she took in the sight of the armed men scattered across her fields. The peaceful morning she had envisioned was shattered, replaced by an unsettling tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Weston Hale, still groggy from sleep, joined her at the window, his brow furrowed in concern. "We need to figure out what they want," he urged, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing in Ilara's chest. "If they're here for trouble, we can't just wait for them to come to us." Ilara nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She had seen enough of the frontier to understand that appearances could be deceiving. What if they're raiders? What if they're here to take what little we have? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Weston replied, trying to keep her grounded. "We should observe them for a while before making any decisions. Maybe they're just passing through." Ilara turned her gaze back to the riders, who were busy setting up their camp. The sight of their horses, strong and restless, only added to her unease. The riders moved with a sense of purpose, their voices low and serious as they organized their supplies. She could see the glint of weapons in the sunlight and the way they kept watch over their surroundings, making it clear they were not to be trifled with. As the sun climbed higher, Alara felt the weight of their scrutiny. Every movement she made seemed to draw their attention, and she could sense their eyes lingering on her homestead, assessing her as if she were a piece of property to be claimed. The knowledge that her act of kindness had inadvertently drawn this danger to her doorstep gnawed at her, filling her with guilt and anxiety. "What if they come here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if they want to take what we have?"
"We need to be prepared," Weston said, his tone resolute. "Let's keep a low profile today. If they're looking for trouble, we need to be ready to defend ourselves." Ilara felt a surge of gratitude for Weston's calm demeanor. He had been through enough in his life to understand the harsh realities of the frontier, and she knew that his experience could be invaluable. Together, they began to gather supplies, making sure to keep their movements discreet. They filled their small cabin with provisions, readying themselves for whatever might come. As the hours passed, the riders continued their activities, seemingly unaware of the tension brewing in the homestead. Ilara watched as they set up a fire, the smoke curling into the air, mingling with the crisp scent of pine. She could hear snippets of conversation, their voices low but urgent. The leader, a tall man with a weathered face named Barrett Cole, moved among them with an air of authority, issuing commands and overseeing the preparations. Ilara's heart raced as she caught Barrett's gaze from across the field. He seemed to be assessing her, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to gauge her character. She felt exposed under his scrutiny, as if he could see through her facade and read her thoughts. It was unsettling, and she turned away, focusing on the tasks at hand. Weston, noticing her distress, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay calm, we'll figure this out together," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the turmoil of her thoughts. As dusk approached, the atmosphere shifted. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. The riders gathered around their fire, their laughter and camaraderie filling the air. Ilara watched from the window, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. The sight of their ease contrasted sharply with her own anxiety, and she felt a pang of longing for the simplicity of her previous life. "What do you think they want?" she asked Weston, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hard to say," he replied, his gaze fixed on the riders. "But we can't let our guard down. They could be here for any number of reasons." The night deepened, and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky. Ilara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, her mind racing with questions. What had she set in motion by helping Weston? Had her kindness put them both in danger? The thought was suffocating, and she struggled to push it aside. As the fire crackled outside, Ilara and Weston huddled together in the dim light of the cabin. They spoke in hushed tones, strategizing and planning for the unknown. Ilara felt a sense of camaraderie with Weston, a bond forged in the face of adversity. They were in this together, and she drew strength from his presence. "Whatever happens, we need to stick together," Weston said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "We can't let fear dictate our actions." Ilara nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She had spent too long living in fear of the world around her, and now, faced with this challenge, she realized she had a choice. She could either succumb to the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her, or stand firm in her convictions. The following morning dawned with a heavy silence that hung over the valley. Ilara awoke to the sound of rustling outside and the faint smell of smoke wafting through the air. She glanced out the window and saw the riders stirring, their movements purposeful as they prepared for the day ahead. The sight sent a chill down her spine, and she felt a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Weston joined her at the window, his expression grave. "They're up early," he observed, his voice low. "We need to be cautious." Ilara nodded, her heart racing as she watched the riders gather in a tight circle. Barrett Cole stood at the center, his commanding presence drawing the attention of the others.
The tension in the air was palpable, and Alara could sense that something significant was about to unfold. "Do you think they're planning to come here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's possible," Weston replied, his gaze fixed on the group. "We need to be ready for anything." As the morning wore on, the riders began to disperse, some heading toward the outskirts of the encampment, while others remained clustered around the fire. Ilara felt a mix of relief and anxiety. They hadn't approached her yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Suddenly, Barrett Cole strode toward the cabin, his demeanor purposeful. Ilara's heart raced as he approached, and she exchanged a worried glance with Weston. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it was daunting. Barrett paused at the door, his gaze piercing as he looked between Ilara and Weston. "We need to talk," he stated, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're the one who helped Weston, aren't you?" Ilara swallowed hard, her throat dry.
"Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I offered him food and shelter." Barrett nodded, his expression inscrutable. "That was a brave thing to do," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "But it's put you in a precarious position. We're not here to cause trouble, but we need to know where you stand." Ilara felt a rush of emotions, fear, uncertainty, and a strange sense of pride at Barrett's acknowledgement of her kindness. "I just wanted to help," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't think it would lead to all of this." Barrett regarded her for a moment, his eyes searching. "Kindness is a rare commodity in these parts," he said, his tone softening. "But it can also attract unwanted attention. We're being hunted, and we need to know if we can trust you." Ilara's heart raced as she processed his words. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, and she felt the gravity of her choices. "I just wanted to help," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't think it would lead to all of this." Barrett regarded her for a moment, his eyes searching. "Kindness is a rare commodity in these parts," he said, his tone softening. "But it can also attract unwanted attention. We're being hunted, and we need to know if we can trust you." Ilara's heart raced as she processed his words. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, and she felt the gravity of her choices. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice firm. "But I won't turn my back on someone who needs help." Barrett studied her for a long moment, and Ilara could feel the tension in the air. Finally, he nodded. "That's what I needed to hear," he said, his voice low. "We're not looking for a fight, but we need to be prepared. If you're willing to stand with us, we could use someone like you." Ilara felt a surge of determination as Barrett's words sank in. She had been thrust into a situation far beyond her control, but now she had a choice to make. She could either retreat into fear or step forward into the unknown. The thought of aligning herself with Barrett and the riders filled her with both dread and excitement. "I'll do what I can," she said, "but I need to know what I'm getting into." Barrett nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We're trying to survive in a world that's become increasingly hostile. If you stand with us, you'll be safe. But if you choose to side with the settlers, you'll find yourself caught in the crossfire." Ilara felt the weight of his words, the implications of her choice heavy on her heart. She glanced at Weston, who watched her with an intensity that mirrored her own internal struggle. They had forged a bond in the face of adversity, and now she had to decide where her loyalties lay. As the sun climbed higher, the tension in the air thickened. Ilara knew that her decision would shape not only her future, but the futures of those around her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The riders were not just a band of outlaws, they represented a choice, a path that could lead to safety or a descent into chaos. With her heart pounding, Ilara made her choice. "I'll stand with you," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I need to understand what that means." Barrett smiled, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Welcome aboard, Ilara. We'll need your strength and courage in the days to come." As the sun began to set, casting a fiery glow across the valley, Ilara felt a sense of resolve wash over her.
She had chosen her path, and now she would face whatever challenges lay ahead with newfound determination. The weight of her decision settled in her chest, but she knew she was not alone. Together with Weston and the riders, she would navigate the uncertain waters of the frontier, ready to confront whatever came next. Ilara felt the weight of her decision settle heavily on her shoulders. She had chosen to align herself with Barrett Cole and the riders, a choice that filled her with both trepidation and a sense of purpose. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Days had passed since she had offered shelter and food to Weston Hale, and the riders had become a constant presence in her life, their watchful eyes never straying far from her. Each day brought new challenges. Ilara found herself caught in a precarious balance, navigating between her desire to help the riders and her innate caution. The riders, while not openly hostile, carried an air of authority that made her uneasy. She often caught Barrett observing her, his expression inscrutable, as if he were weighing her every move. The scrutiny was palpable, and Ilara felt the pressure mounting with each passing moment. The mornings began with the sound of hooves thudding against the earth, the riders stirring to life as they prepared for the day. Ilara would rise early, her heart racing as she glanced outside to see the encampment sprawled across her fields. The sight of the riders, their horses grazing nearby, sent a shiver down her spine. She had extended her hand to help one man, and now she was surrounded by a small army. The irony was not lost on her. Her act of kindness had drawn an entire militia to her doorstep. As the sun rose higher, Ilara found herself working alongside Weston, who had taken to helping her with the chores around her homestead. The two shared a silent understanding, a bond forged in their shared experience of survival. Weston was grateful for her hospitality, and he often offered her words of encouragement. "You're stronger than you think, Ilara," he would say, his voice steady. "This is your land, and you have every right to protect it." Yet, despite his reassurances, Ilara felt a gnawing uncertainty. The riders were not just a band of outlaws, they were a force to be reckoned with, and their presence was a constant reminder of the precariousness of her situation. On one hand, they provided a sense of safety, a barrier against potential threats from the outside world. On the other hand, their motives remained unclear, and Ilara was acutely aware that her allegiance could easily become a double-edged sword. One afternoon, while she and Weston were mending a fence on the edge of her property, they spotted Barrett approaching. His silhouette cut a striking figure against the backdrop of the setting sun, and Ilara felt her pulse quicken. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and she could sense that he had something significant to discuss. "Mind if I join you?" Barrett asked, his voice low and gravelly. He leaned against the fence, his eyes scanning the horizon, as if searching for something just beyond sight. Ilara exchanged a glance with Weston before nodding. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "We were just fixing this fence before the storm rolls in." Barrett nodded, his gaze shifting to the fence. "Good work. This land needs to be protected, especially with what's coming." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, her curiosity piqued. She could sense the urgency in his tone, and it sent a chill down her spine. Barrett straightened, his expression serious. "The settlers are restless. They see us as a threat, and they want to reclaim this land. We've heard whispers of a militia forming among them, and they're not looking for a peaceful resolution." Ilara felt her stomach drop. The settlers were her people, the ones she had grown up alongside. She had always believed in their cause, but now she found herself torn between two worlds. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have a unique position here," Barrett replied, his gaze piercing. "You know the land, and you know the settlers. If you can gather information, it could help us prepare for what's coming." "We need to know their plans if we're going to protect ourselves." The weight of his request settled heavily on her. She had already made one difficult choice, and now she was being asked to betray her own community. "I don't know if I can do that," she admitted, her voice trembling. "They're my neighbors, my friends." Barrett's expression softened slightly. "I understand, but you have to think about your safety and the safety of your home. This isn't just about us, it's about everyone in this valley. If the settlers come for us, it won't end well for anyone." Ilara's heart raced as she considered his words. The thought of turning against her own people filled her with dread, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. If the settlers were indeed forming a militia, her act of kindness could have dire consequences for everyone involved. She felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her, and the uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Days turned into a blur of tension and uncertainty. Ilara found herself caught in a web of conflicting loyalties, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she was being watched, judged, and tested. The riders continued their preparations, sharpening their weapons and training their horses, while Ilara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy in her daily routine. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Weston joined her. He could sense the turmoil within her, and he sat quietly beside her, offering a comforting presence. "You're carrying a heavy burden, Ilara," he said softly, his voice filled with understanding. "I don't know what to do, Weston," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm being pulled in two different directions. I want to protect my home, but I don't want to betray the people I've known my whole life." Weston nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You have to trust your instincts. You've shown kindness when it mattered most. That's not something to take lightly. Whatever choice you make, it should come from a place of honor." Ilara sighed, feeling the weight of his words. Honor had always been important to her, but now it felt like a double-edged sword. She had to consider not just her own safety, but the safety of those around her. The settlers were her community, and turning against them could have dire consequences. As the days continued to unfold, the tension in the air thickened. The riders were preparing for something, and Ilara could feel it in her bones. She spent her days working alongside Weston, but her mind was often elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of the impending conflict. One afternoon, while she was tending to her garden, a commotion erupted from the direction of the riders' camp. Ilara straightened, her heart racing as she rushed to see what was happening. The sight that greeted her sent a chill down her spine. A group of settlers had approached the camp, their expressions fierce and determined. Barrett stood at the forefront, his stance firm as he faced the approaching settlers. Ilara's heart raced as she recognized Cyrus Halloran, a prominent figure among the settlers, leading the charge. The tension between the two groups crackled in the air like a live wire, and Ilara felt her stomach drop. "What's going on?" she asked Weston, who had joined her at her side. "I don't know, but it doesn't look good," he replied, his voice tense. As Ilara watched, Barrett stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the settlers. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We're just trying to survive out here." Cyrus scoffed, his expression filled with disdain. "You think you can just take over this land? We won't stand for it. You're nothing but a band of outlaws, and we won't let you threaten our families." Ilara felt her heart race as the tension escalated. She could see the anger in Cyrus's eyes, the determination to protect what he believed was rightfully his. The settlers had always been a tight-knit community, and they would fight fiercely to defend their land. Barrett remained composed, his gaze unwavering. "We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to protect ourselves. If you want to fight, you'll find one, but it won't end well for anyone." Ilara's breath caught in her throat as the two men faced off, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. She could see the riders shifting uneasily, their hands resting on their weapons, ready for a confrontation. In that moment, Ilara knew she had to make a choice. She could stand back and watch as the two groups clash, or she could step forward and try to defuse the situation. The thought of violence filled her with dread, and she couldn't bear the idea of her home being torn apart by conflict. "Wait," Alara called out, her voice rising above the tension. She stepped forward, her heart racing as all eyes turned to her. "Please, we don't have to do this. We can find a way to talk this out." Barrett and Cyrus both looked at her, surprise etched on their faces. "Alara, stay back," Barrett warned, his voice low. "No, I won't," she insisted, her determination surging. "This is my land, and I won't let it be destroyed by fighting. We can find a way to coexist." The tension in the air shifted as Alara stood her ground. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, the uncertainty hanging thick. In that moment, she realized that her choice would define not only her future, but the future of everyone in the valley. "I know you all care about your families and your homes," she continued, her voice steady, "but fighting won't solve anything. We need to find a way to work together, to protect what we have without tearing each other apart." Cyrus's expression softened slightly, and for a moment it seemed as though he was considering her words. "And how do you propose we do that?" he asked, his tone skeptical but curious. Alara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Let's sit down and talk. We can discuss our concerns, our needs, and find a way to coexist peacefully. We're all human beings trying to survive out here. There has to be a way forward." Barrett glanced at her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. Alara could sense the tension in the air, but she stood firm, determined to bridge the gap between the two groups. She had made her choice, and now it was time to face the consequences of that choice head-on. Alara stood resolute, her heart pounding in her chest as she faced the two opposing groups. The tension crackled in the air, heavy with uncertainty and fear. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, but she knew she had to stand firm. The lives of everyone involved hung in the balance, and she was determined to find a way to navigate this precarious situation. Barrett Cole, the leader of the riders, regarded her with a mixture of admiration and caution. His weathered face softened slightly as he considered her words. "You're brave, Alara," he said, his voice low but steady. "But bravery without a plan can lead to disaster." Cyrus Halloran, the leader of the settlers, looked skeptical but intrigued. "And what do you suggest? We sit down for tea while my people are being threatened?" His tone was sharp, but Alara could sense a flicker of curiosity behind his anger. "No, not tea," Alara replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But we can find a way to talk. We need to understand each other's needs and fears. If we don't, we'll only end up fighting, and that will solve nothing." The two men exchanged glances, their expressions revealing the conflict raging within them. It was clear that both factions had suffered too much already, and Alara's plea hung in the air, a fragile hope amidst the impending storm. Barrett took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "What if we agree to meet, just the three of us, away from our people? We can talk without the pressure of the crowd." Cyrus hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. "And what guarantee do I have that this isn't a trap? Your people could be planning something while we're distracted." Alara interjected. "This is my land, and I won't allow violence here. I will ensure that both sides respect the truce. If you want peace, you must be willing to trust me, even if it's just a little." The silence stretched as both men contemplated her words. Finally, Cyrus nodded slowly, his expression hardening once more. "Fine, but if this goes south, I'll hold you accountable." Barrett offered a curt nod, his eyes narrowing. "Agreed. We'll meet at the old oak tree by the river at dawn. No weapons, just words." Alara felt a surge of relief mixed with apprehension. This was a fragile truce, but it was a start. As the two men retreated to their respective groups, she turned back to her homestead, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had taken a stand, but now the real test lay ahead. As night fell, Alara prepared for the meeting. She gathered her thoughts, recalling the stories of her ancestors who had fought for their land. They had always believed in the power of dialogue over violence. She hoped to honor their legacy by forging a path toward understanding. The next morning, Alara awoke before dawn, the chill of the morning air biting at her skin. She donned her warmest coat and made her way to the old oak tree, her heart racing with anticipation. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the landscape. She arrived early, hoping to gather her thoughts before the meeting. As she stood beneath the sprawling branches of the oak, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The tree had witnessed countless seasons, and she hoped it would bear witness to a new beginning. The sound of hooves drew her attention, and she looked up to see Barrett and Cyrus approaching from opposite directions. Both men dismounted, their expressions stern but curious. Ilara took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady. "Let's talk." They gathered in a small circle beneath the oak, the air thick with tension. Ilara could sense the unease radiating from both men, but she pressed on. "We all want to protect our homes and families, but if we continue down this path, we'll only create more enemies." Barrett crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "I understand that, but the settlers have been encroaching on our territory. We can't just sit back and let that happen." Cyrus shot back. "And you think your riders have the right to dictate who stays and who goes? We have families to protect too." Ilara intervened, her voice firm but compassionate. "What if we establish clear boundaries? We can designate areas for both groups, ensuring that neither side feels threatened. We can coexist without conflict if we communicate openly." Barrett considered her suggestion, his expression softening. "It's a start, but how do we ensure that both sides respect the boundaries?" Cyrus nodded, his skepticism still evident. "And what about the riders who feel entitled to take what they want?" Ilara raised her hands, trying to calm the rising tension. "We can create a council, a group made up of both riders and settlers. This council can oversee the agreements and mediate any disputes that arise. If we work together, we can prevent misunderstandings from escalating into violence." The two men exchanged glances, the weight of her proposal settling in. "A council could work," Barrett said slowly, "but it requires trust, and trust is hard to come by." Cyrus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I want to believe in this, Ilara, but my people are scared. They've lost too much already." Ilara stepped closer, her voice earnest. "I understand that fear. I feel it too. But if we don't take this chance, we risk losing everything. Let's show our people that there's a better way." After a long silence, Barrett nodded. "All right, let's give it a try. We'll take this back to our groups and see if they're willing to agree." Cyrus nodded reluctantly. "I'll do the same. But if this fails, I won't hesitate to protect my people." As they wrapped up the meeting, Ilara felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small step, but it was progress. She had managed to bring them together, if only for a moment. As they parted ways, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and challenging journey. In the following days, Ilara worked tirelessly to rally support for the council. She spoke to her neighbors, urging them to consider the benefits of cooperation over conflict. Many were hesitant, still harboring fears of the riders, but Ilara's determination began to sway some hearts. Barrett and Cyrus, too, took their messages back to their respective groups. They faced skepticism and resistance, but they pressed on, emphasizing the need for unity in the face of adversity. The council began to take shape, and as the days turned into weeks, Ilara felt a sense of purpose growing within her. The first council meeting was set to take place under the old oak tree, a symbol of their commitment to peace. Ilara arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation. She had prepared a list of guidelines for the council, hoping to foster a spirit of cooperation among the members. As the sun rose higher in the sky, representatives from both the riders and settlers began to arrive. Ilara greeted them with a warm smile, determined to create an atmosphere of openness. The tension was palpable, but she could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. Barrett was the first to speak, his voice carrying authority. "We're here today to find a way forward. We've all suffered losses, and it's time to put aside our differences for the sake of our families." Cyrus followed, his tone more cautious. "This is a chance for us to work together, but it requires trust. We must be willing to listen to one another." Ilara stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Let's start by discussing our concerns. What do we need to feel safe and respected in this land?" As they began to share their thoughts, Ilara felt a surge of hope. For the first time, they were not just riders and settlers, they were neighbors with shared goals. They talked about boundaries, resources, and mutual respect, slowly building a foundation for cooperation. The meeting lasted for hours, and while it was filled with disagreements and heated exchanges, it was also marked by moments of understanding. Ilara watched as barriers began to crumble, replaced by a sense of community that had long been absent. By the time the sun began to set, they had established a set of guidelines for the council, a tentative agreement that would allow them to coexist peacefully. Ilara felt a rush of exhilaration as they concluded the meeting, knowing that they had taken a significant step toward healing the wounds that had divided them. As the representatives departed, Ilara stood beneath the oak tree, a sense of pride swelling within her. She had helped to forge a connection that had once seemed impossible, and while the road ahead would be challenging, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. In the weeks that followed, the council met regularly, working through conflicts and celebrating successes. Ilara found herself becoming a bridge between the two groups, earning respect from both sides. The riders began to see her as an ally, while the settlers recognized her commitment to their shared future. The valley slowly transformed as cooperation replaced hostility. The riders and settlers began to work together, sharing resources and knowledge. Ilara watched as children played together, laughter echoing across the fields, a sound she had longed to hear. But challenges remained. There were still those who resisted the change, clinging to old grudges and fears. Ilara knew that the journey was far from over, but she was determined to keep pushing forward. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Barrett rode up to her homestead. He dismounted and approached with a serious expression. "Ilara, we need to talk." Concern washed over her. "What's wrong?" "There are still factions among the riders who don't agree with our truce. They're planning something, and I fear they may try to undermine everything we've built." Ilara's heart sank. "What do we do?" "We need to show them that we're stronger together. I want you to come with me to speak to them. If they see you standing with us, it might help sway their opinions." Ilara hesitated, the weight of the request heavy on her shoulders. "But what if they don't listen?" "Then we'll have to stand firm together. We've come too far to let fear dictate our future." Taking a deep breath, Ilara nodded. "All right, let's do it." That night, they rode into the heart of the riders' camp, where a group of discontented riders had gathered. The atmosphere was tense, and Ilara could feel the hostility radiating from them. As she stepped forward, she felt Barrett's reassuring presence beside her. "Listen up." Barrett's voice cut through the murmurs. "I know there are those among you who oppose our truce with the settlers, but I want you to hear from someone who has taken a stand for peace." Ilara took a step forward, her heart pounding. "I'm here because I believe in the power of cooperation. We've all lost too much, and it's time to put aside our differences. Together, we can create a future that benefits us all." The crowd shifted uneasily, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You think we can trust them?" one rider shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Yes, I do," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "I've seen the impact of working together. We've already begun to see positive changes in the valley, but it requires all of us to be willing to let go of the past." Barrett added, "We're not asking you to forget what's happened, but to understand that fighting will only lead to more loss. We have a chance to build something better." As the tension hung in the air, Ilara could see some of the riders exchanging glances, their expressions softening. She pressed on, her voice filled with conviction. Let's show our people that we can stand united, that we're stronger together. We owe it to ourselves and to those we've lost. After what felt like an eternity, one of the riders stepped forward. I don't agree with everything you say, but I respect your courage. Maybe it's time we gave this a chance. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Ilara felt a surge of hope. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step in the right direction. As they left the camp, Barrett turned to Ilara, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. You did it. You reached them. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest. We're just getting started. There's still so much work to do. And so the days turned into weeks, and the valley continued to change. Ilara found herself at the center of a movement that was reshaping their community. The council grew stronger, and the relationships between the riders and settlers deepened. But challenges remained. There were still disagreements and misunderstandings, and Ilara knew that not everyone would be on board. Yet she held on to the belief that change was possible, and she was determined to see it through. One evening, as she stood on her porch gazing at the stars, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The valley was alive with the sounds of laughter and camaraderie, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of belonging. Ilara had chosen her path, and while it had been fraught with challenges, it had also been filled with moments of connection and hope. She had learned that kindness could ripple through even the darkest of times, and that the choices we make can shape not only our own destinies, but the destinies of those around us. As she turned to head inside, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place. Ilara smiled, knowing that they had forged a new beginning, one built on understanding and respect. The valley was no longer just a place of survival, it was becoming a home. In that moment, she realized that the true strength of the frontier lay not in the weapons they carried, but in the bonds they forged. And as long as they chose to stand together, there was hope for a brighter future.